Boss called me into his office at 4:37 on a Friday afternoon. That's never good. In 23 years of working in food safety compliance, I had learned that bad news always comes at the end of the week, when there's no time to fight back. "We're going in a different direction," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. His name was Trevor, and he had been with the company for 14 months. I had been there since before he was hired at whatever firm he came from, before this one. "The role is being restructured." "Restructured," I said. "The position is being eliminated. Your last day will be 2 weeks from today." I sat with that for a moment. 23 years. I had built the compliance infrastructure at Hartwell Foods from a 3-ring binder and a prayer into a certified, audited, federally recognized food safety system that had kept the company out of every major outbreak, every FDA warning letter, every class action that had swallowed our competitors whole. I had done it quietly, methodically, without fanfare, because that was the job. "Is there a performance issue I should know about?" I asked. Trevor shifted in his chair. "It's not performance related. The company is moving toward a more agile compliance model." "Agile," I repeated. "More collaborative, less siloed." I looked at him. "Trevor, we have a routine FDA inspection in 9 days." "Yes, and the transition team will be in place well before then." "What transition team?" He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was an org chart. My position, Senior Director of Food Safety and Compliance, had been replaced with a new title, Head of Regulatory Innovation. The name under it was someone I didn't recognize. I flipped to the next page. A LinkedIn printout, 27 years old, a master's degree in communications. Her previous job was social media coordinator for a regional grocery chain. I looked up at Trevor. He was looking at the window. "She's the VP of Operations daughter," I said. It wasn't a question. I had heard the name at a company happy hour 2 months ago. The VP talking about how his daughter was looking for something new, something with more responsibility, something she could really sink her teeth into. Trevor said nothing. I put the folder back on his desk, stood up, shook his hand, because that's what you do, and walked back to my office. My hands were completely steady. That surprised me. I sat down in my chair, the good one I brought from home because the company issued ones destroyed your lower back, and I looked at my monitors and I thought, 9 days. 9 days until an FDA inspection for which I had 18 months of documentation, corrective action logs, supplier verification records, environmental monitoring data, and allergen control protocols, all organized in a system that only I fully understood. Not because I had designed it to be impenetrable, because I had designed it to be thorough, and thoroughness takes time to learn. I started boxing up my personal items, and then I stopped. I picked up my phone and I texted my wife. They let me go. She called immediately, and I let it go to voicemail, because I needed to think, not feel, and those two things could not happen at the same time inside me. What I was thinking was this: the FDA inspection was not the problem. The problem was the FSMA 204 traceability records we had been in the middle of updating. The Food Safety Modernization Act had tightened its traceability requirements, and Hartwell Foods processed both leafy greens and soft cheeses, 2 of the highest risk categories on the FDA's food traceability list. We were 2 weeks away from completing our lot code digitization project. 2 weeks. The paper records we were transitioning away from were accurate but not immediately searchable in the format the FDA's new protocols required. If an inspector pulled a lot code and asked for the full traceability chain, and the person sitting in my chair didn't know that the digitized system and the paper backup used different date formats, a quirk we had flagged internally and were in the process of correcting, it would look like a discrepancy. And in FDA inspection language, a discrepancy in traceability records during a routine inspection could escalate to a Form 483 observation, which could escalate to a warning letter, which could escalate to a consent decree or a recall, depending on what else they found and how they characterized it. This was not hypothetical. I had seen it happen at 2 other companies during my career. One of them never fully recovered. I finished boxing my things. I left my badge on Trevor's assistant's desk on the way out. I did not say goodbye to my team because I didn't trust myself to do it without saying something that would make their jobs harder. I drove home. I sat in my driveway for 11 minutes. Then I went inside. My wife, Donna, had made coffee. She didn't ask me anything. She put the cup in front of me and sat down across the table and waited. That's one of the things about being married for 31 years to the right person. They know when to wait. "The inspection is in 9 days," I said. She nodded. She had heard enough of my work life to understand what that meant without a full explanation. "And the traceability records are mid-transition." "Can you tell someone?" she asked. Someone who would listen. I thought about that. Trevor wouldn't listen. The VP of operations, the father of the woman now sitting in my chair, certainly wouldn't listen. The CEO, a man named Gordon Whitfield, was someone I had met exactly twice in 23 years. Once at a company anniversary dinner, once in a hallway when the elevator was broken and we both took the stairs and made small talk for 2 flights. I didn't have his number, but I knew his assistant's name, and his assistant's assistant knew me, because I had worked with her on the documentation for our last third-party audit, and she had sent me a card when my father passed. I didn't do anything that night. I made dinner with Donna, watched part of a baseball game, went to bed. I am not someone who acts impulsively. That, I think, is what they meant by not agile. What they called rigid, I called reliable. There is a difference, and it matters, and 23 years of 0 FDA warning letters is the proof. The next morning, I started writing. I wrote a 12-page transition memo. Not out of bitterness. I want to be clear about that. I wrote it because I knew what was coming, and I wasn't willing to let Hartwell Foods walk into an FDA inspection unprepared just because some executive wanted to put his daughter in a title that sounded important. The memo covered the status of the FSMA 204 digitization project, the specific lot code format discrepancy, and how to explain it to an inspector, the names and contact information of our third-party auditors, the location of every backup file, and the 7 items on my internal watch list that I had flagged for follow-up before the inspection. Then I emailed it to Trevor. He replied 4 hours later, "Thank you. We'll be in touch if we have questions." We'll be in touch, like I was a vendor they were evaluating. I forwarded the memo to my personal email, and I put it in a folder on my home computer. Then I waited. I am very good at waiting. Most people aren't, and that's how they get into trouble. 6 days later, my phone rang at 6:22 in the morning. Unknown number, but a Chicago area code. Hartwell's corporate office was in Naperville. I answered. It was Trevor. He sounded like he hadn't slept. "We have a situation," he said. Tell me. The FDA pre-inspection walkthrough had happened the day before, routine, just a preliminary visit to confirm facility access and documentation format. The inspector had asked to see the FSMA 204 traceability records for a specific lot of romaine that had moved through our Joliet facility in March. The new head of regulatory innovation, the VP's daughter, whose name was Cassidy, had pulled the digitized records, which showed the lot entering the facility on March 14th. The paper backup showed March 13th. One day, one formatting discrepancy, exactly the one I had documented in my transition memo. The inspector had flagged it and asked for clarification. Cassidy had said she would need to check with her team. The inspector had left without being satisfied and indicated she would return with a formal documentation request within 48 hours. "Trevor," I said, "did you read the memo I sent you?" Silence. "Page 4, I said, "the section titled Lot Code Date Format Discrepancy. I explained exactly what caused this, how to document the explanation, and what language to use when speaking with an inspector. You had this information 6 days ago." More silence. Then, "Can you come in?" I looked at Donna across the kitchen table. She had heard everything because I hadn't put the phone to my ear. I had set it on the table between us. She raised her eyebrows in the way that said, "Your call." "I'm not currently an employee of Hartwell Foods," I said. "I know that." "My badge was turned in. My systems access was revoked." "I know that too." "I'll need a consulting agreement," I said, in writing, before I set foot in the building. Trevor said he would have legal draw something up immediately. I told him I needed it before noon. I called my own attorney at 7 a.m., apologized for the early hour, and had him review the agreement when it came through at 11:40. He made 2 changes. Trevor accepted both without negotiating. That told me everything about how bad the situation actually was. I drove to the Naperville office. Cassidy was in my old chair. I noticed that immediately because it was my chair, the one from home, and I had forgotten to take it when I left. She looked up when I walked in, and I could see from her face that she had been crying recently and had tried to fix it with makeup, which hadn't fully worked. I did not say anything unkind. That's not who I am. I said, "I'm going to need to work at that desk for a while. Can I get you a chair from the conference room?" She moved. I sat down. I pulled up the systems I still understood better than anyone in the building. I wrote a formal explanation memo for the FDA using the precise regulatory language I had learned over 2 decades, documenting the date format discrepancy as a known transitional artifact of the digitization project, attaching the internal project timeline that proved we had flagged it proactively, and cross-referencing it with our corrective action log. Gordon Whitfield, the CEO, came into the office around 2 p.m. He shook my hand. He said, "I heard you predicted this." "I documented it," I said. "There's a difference." He nodded slowly, the way that people nod when they're recalibrating something. "What else do we need to know before the inspection?" I handed him the 7-item watch list from my original memo. He read it. He looked at Trevor, who was standing near the door. Then he looked back at me. "How long would it take to get these 7 items resolved?" "If I have full systems access and cooperative support from the QA team, 4 days. The inspection is in 3 days." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "What would you need to get as much as possible done in 3 days?" My consulting agreement extended, reinstatement of my systems access, and I'd like my chair back. Gordon almost smiled. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was in the neighborhood. He looked at Trevor again, and this time Trevor had the expression of a man who understood that the direction they had gone had been, in fact, the wrong direction, and that the cost of admitting that was significantly lower than the cost of the alternative. "Done," Gordon said. I worked for 3 days straight. I went home each night, slept 4 hours, came back. Donna brought me lunch on the second day, drove 40 minutes each way, left it at the front desk, didn't come up to the office because she knew I was in the middle of something. I ate it at my desk while cross-checking environmental monitoring data from the previous quarter. My old QA team worked alongside me. They didn't ask questions about why I was back, they just worked. There's a specific kind of professional trust that gets built over years of doing hard things together, and it doesn't disappear because of an org chart change. It was still there. I was grateful for it every single hour of those 3 days. The FDA inspector arrived on a Wednesday morning. Her name was Dr. Renee Fowler, and she had been doing facility inspections for 11 years. I had interacted with her once before, during an inspection at a previous employer, and she was exactly the kind of inspector you want. Thorough, fair, not looking to make an example of anyone, just looking to verify that the systems actually worked. I was not in the room for the inspection. My consulting agreement didn't cover that. I sat in a conference room 2 floors up and answered questions by text when Cassidy needed to ask something. She asked 4 questions. I answered all 4 in under 2 minutes each. 3 hours later, Trevor came up to the conference room. "She's done," he said. And? No form, 483 observations. She noted the digitization project in her report as a compliant transition in progress. No flags. I nodded. Trevor sat down across from me. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had made a decision and then watched it unfold in ways he hadn't anticipated, which is the experience most people have when they prioritize the appearance of progress over the reality of it. "I owe you an apology," he said. I didn't say he didn't, because he did. "Okay," I said. "The decision to let you go was..." He started, and then stopped, because there wasn't a version of that sentence that didn't end badly for him. "It's done," I said. It was, in fact, done. I had no desire to labor over it. I had been asked to come in, I had done the work, the company had made it through the inspection, and I was going home to my wife and a dinner that didn't come in a paper bag. Gordon Whitfield called me that evening. He asked if I would consider coming back on a formal basis, not as an employee but as a retained consultant. 30 hours a month, a retainer, plus hourly above that. The number he mentioned was more than my old annual salary divided by 12, for 30 hours a month. I told him I would think about it, which I did, for about 20 minutes. Then I called him back, and I said yes. The consulting agreement was signed the following week. I set up a home office in the spare bedroom, the one that used to be my daughter's before she moved to Portland. I bought a proper desk. I put my framed copy of our SQF certification from 2009 on the wall, the first major certification I had secured for Hartwell in a year when nobody thought we were going to make it, because the facility had 3 non-conformances and the auditor was not a patient person. We had made it then, by doing the work, by knowing the systems, by not taking shortcuts because shortcuts were faster. My wife asked me, the night after I signed the new agreement, if I was bitter about how it had gone, being let go the way I was, the 2 weeks sitting at home while someone else's kid sat in my chair and didn't know what she didn't know. I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "Not bitter." Really. Really. Bitter would mean I wanted something bad to happen to them. I don't. I wanted the inspection to go well, and it did. I wanted the company to not get a warning letter, and they didn't. I wanted things to go right. She considered that, even after what they did to you? The company isn't Trevor, I said. It isn't the VP or his daughter. It's also the QA team that worked 3 straight days without complaining. It's the line supervisors who maintain those environmental monitoring logs every single week because they understand why it matters. It's 23 years of people doing the right thing, quietly. Donna looked at me for a long moment. You really believe that, she said. I do. She picked up her wine glass. Okay, she said, then I'm glad it worked out. Gordon called me 6 weeks into the retainer to ask about a supplier verification issue with a new tomato processor they were considering out of Florida. I had the relevant FSMA guidance documents on my screen before he finished asking the question. Some things you build over decades, a body of knowledge, a way of working, a system that holds when someone puts pressure on it. Not because it's rigid, because it was built right. The chair is back in my home office now. I brought it with me when I cleaned out my desk the first time, the week after the inspection, when they gave me an actual moving cart and a whole afternoon to do it properly. It's the right height for the desk, and the lumbar support is calibrated exactly the way I like it, and when I sit down in the morning with my coffee to start the day's work, it fits like it was made for me. Which, in a manner of speaking, it was. I keep coming back to that Friday afternoon, 4047 p.m., the way Trevor couldn't quite look at me when he said the words. And the thing is, I wasn't even angry. Not really. I was just very, very clear on what was about to happen, and I knew nobody in that building was going to believe me until it already had. That's a specific kind of loneliness, knowing something is coming and not being able to stop it from outside the room. What I've learned, not from that moment, but from the weeks after it, from the 3 days I spent rebuilding what should never have been dismantled, is that the actions you take when nobody is watching, when there's no reward attached and no applause coming, are the ones that actually define you. I sent that 12-page memo to Trevor, knowing full well he probably wouldn't read it. I sent it anyway, not for him, because it was the right thing to do for the people whose food safety depended on systems they didn't even know existed. That's the only kind of integrity that holds up under pressure, the kind you practice when it costs you something. I think about Cassidy, the VP's daughter, sitting in my chair when I walked back in. She hadn't asked to be put in an impossible situation. She was 27 years old, and someone who loved her had handed her a title without handing her the knowledge to carry it. That's not cruelty on her part. That's what happens when the people in charge of decisions prioritize comfort over competence. She paid for that, in her own way, in those hours before I arrived. I don't hold anything against her. But I do think about what it costs people, real people, not executives, when the wrong call gets made in a boardroom for the wrong reasons. The intelligence part, the knowing your craft so completely that you can write a 12-page memo from memory at your kitchen table at 7 in the morning, that doesn't happen by accident. It happens because you spent 23 years choosing to learn one more thing instead of coasting. Choosing to understand why the system works, not just that it works. There were easier jobs I could have taken, jobs where nobody would have called me rigid. I stayed in the hard one because I believed the work mattered, and that belief required me to actually be good at it. And the part that gets talked about the least, the endurance, the 4 hours of sleep, the lunch Donna drove 80 minutes round trip to bring me because she knew I wouldn't leave. The not quitting when I had every legitimate reason to walk out and let them figure it out themselves. Persistence isn't dramatic. It doesn't look like anything from the outside. It's just showing up again the next morning and doing the next necessary thing. What came back to me in the end wasn't luck. It was the sum of every decision I had made over 2 decades to do the work correctly, to document it honestly, and to care about it past the point where caring was convenient. Those things compound, quietly, invisibly, until one day a federal inspector leaves without a single observation and a CEO shakes your hand in a conference room, and the math of it all becomes impossible to argue with. The chair is in my home office now. It fits exactly right.